Ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for coming to the Tivoli Room at the Throckmorton Theater. Please welcome Mr. Mort Sahl.
The last great jazz players. That's right. They're hard to come by, and I know firsthand. Thanks for coming. I didn't expect to see anybody, and I almost can't see anybody. I have to have an operation on Wednesday, and I went over there to get the blood work today at Marine and Social Security charged me $10 because, as you know, this government is over budget, and arming the Syrian rebels have a lot of demands, and I took time and resources, and they're taxing my pension too. This is all under this great leader that we have. If you saw the service in Dallas for the cops, did you see Obama there? He mentioned himself 45 times during his speech. Well, I didn't think you were going to laugh at that, but that's okay.
46.
46, so good. So, yeah, and hung out with Bush, which he doesn't find repellent. And you know, the myth goes on. I know that a lot of you have other demands on your time living up here than to see what happened with the Democratic Party. I know you're trying to be gluten-free and lactose-free and do your yoga, but you have to look at this. You know, you have to look at this a little bit. Trump, as you know, has taken a vice president who is the governor of Indiana, which is also the home of Dan Quayle. Remember him? George Bush. So we ask a lot of you in here. We ask if you remember what the purpose of the country was. And I know there's not a lot of great sightlines in this theatrical venue that we use. And sometimes I have to sit down because of the demands of nature. But generally speaking, yesterday I was down at Coyote Coffee. And a guy came in and was trying to sell tennis lessons in Tiburon. That wouldn't seem like the best place, but that's what he's selling. And you know, if you want to be among the outstanding people who live in Tiburon, and a lady started to talk to me there. You know, they don't think that I had a family or I was in love with anybody. They think I want to talk about politics. This lady told me, it's good that we're in Afghanistan because the Russians ruined it. It had a high standard of living. Are you aware of that, Afghanistan? But anyway, so people think they have to talk to me about politics, which is the last thing I'm interested in. You know, my idea of a good time is to go to a movie with Gregory Peck or Jimmy Stewart or John Wayne, one of those guys. So we're going to start the movie series. I know you've heard that before, but Lucy's finally starting the movie series. And one of the movies I'm going to show, by the way, is Hondo with John Wayne. And he comes into Geraldine Page's ranch because his horses died. And she makes him dinner. And then she starts to feed his dog. He said, don't feed him. He was independent when I found him, and I aimed to keep him that way. And she says, everybody needs somebody. And Wayne says, yes, too bad, isn't it? That's the way he ruminates about love. So the old movies had something you don't see when you go to see a Woody Allen movie at the Sequoia. But Well, I want to touch all these familiar bases with you. How did you feel when Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton? Did any of you see that?
Yeah. Relieved.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really was. And it made you wonder why you wrote him a check and why you believed him when he spoke to you. And if that's for the good of the Democratic Party, it sure escaped me. But she emerges spotless through all this. Even though she and Petraeus ran money out of the Benghazi mission to fund the Syrian rebels. Petraeus got caught at least, and he had a good time, remember?
Yeah.
He got mixed up with that girl. He's one of the few guys in history noted for having a good time with a Jewish girl. Thank you. If one person appreciates that, I'm pleased. Anyway, so we'll talk about all this stuff. Well, Bernie Sanders did that, you know. I couldn't believe it. I know that politics is a business of compromise, but he sure ain't Roosevelt, who not only did it his way, but he had Wilkie ready to join the Democratic Party to do it his way with him. We've fallen from very towering heights, you know. Now, I first started talking about all this in 1963 at the Hungry Eye. I had one job before that with Ken's band at the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach near LA. I got $10 that night. And the guy wanted it back. The show didn't go on. And I gave it back to him, very accommodating. And then I floated around Berkeley for a long time, and I got started at the Hungry Eye, which was a folk club then. You know, they had a black guy who resembled vaguely Harry Belafonte and sang these songs about labor and so forth. And it was a quarter to get in. No liquor license, and it was in the Columbus Tower, where Coppola has bought that building. And we had 83 seats, and it had a smorgasbord too. That Wonder Bread and that bologna. Remember the round bologna? With that stuff you have to peel off around the edge? Maybe you don't, maybe you haven't thought that. But you can do that, that's an option. And American cheese. So for a guy living in Berkeley, it was really like a feast. And in between shows, I used to go to the City Lights bookstore. And we did a lot of shows, you know, we did 3 shows. And when the Hungry Eye got hot, when I made the cover of Time, we did 5 shows at the Hungry Eye. The half hour, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30. And Enrico would line up the people on the sidewalk, and then you go in. It had no marquee or anything. Enrico just put up there, you know, Hungry Eye, Mort Sahl. And Herb Cain came by once and he said, I told you your name would be open paint. And that was true. So he helped us a lot in the beginning. He took a strong dislike to me later on. But you know, the closer you get to the truth, the more you erode your relationship with people, which is okay unless you're married to them. Then it's a problem. I've been married 3 times. I want you to know my credentials before you might say, who is this guy to discuss marriage? I'm contemplating it. You shouldn't have come to this show. 3 times. And I had a great kid who only made it to 20, actually 19. And he was born on Bastille Day. And he went to Santa Monica High School. And the teacher looked at the seating chart and she said, is your father that guy that talks about the Kennedy assassination? And my son said, yeah. And she said, well, tell your father I don't believe in conspiracies. What do you think of that? And he said, I think that's why they got away with it. I'm kind of proud of that answer. You know? I think we schooled them well. By the way, conspiracy, I noticed Hillary used that term this week, conspiracy theorist. A conspiracy is defined by law bite as 2 or more people. And this one's got a lot in it. You know, Julian Assange, who was locked in the Ecuadorian embassy, I hope he likes their cuisine. He's been in there 5 years. There's a jury in Eastern Virginia waiting for him, impaneled by Hillary Clinton, if he should ever get out. No one has ever been acquitted in East Virginia courts. So Assange is, he's one of a couple of rebels we have. We have him, and we have Edward Snowden, and everybody else goes along, you know. And the FBI does its best, and what have they done? Oh, they cleared Mrs. Clinton this week, that's right. And even though it took some persuading, after she was cleared by them, in which the director, Comey, said, you know, she did some things that were irresponsible, but, you know, they're not outside the realm. And then President Clinton didn't know that, so he flew to see the Attorney General to make sure she could get off. And in between his regular runs to Haiti and Davos and the Bilderberger meeting in Dresden and so forth. You know about that whole group? It's a power group. Charlie Rose is in that group. You know the guy in the morning on CBS? Looks like a horse. Yeah, kind of equine is the way I would put it, if it were not above the intellectual reaches of, anyway. So, you know, we're streaming tonight. You know that we're going out on, Chris is producing the show, and Chris Britt, and we're streaming. Last week he had people in Saudi Arabia, which is very good for women if you're looking for a career. Saudi Arabia is a good place for you. Open up your abilities. And where else? Buenos Aires?
Yeah.
Right. And the United States is in that too. You know, that whole thing in Rio, that's a coup d'etat to get rid of that lady who was the president, and also get rid of Maduro in Venezuela, which hasn't succeeded yet. Saudi Arabia has succeeded. You remember them, don't you? As Dick Cheney said, the people who blew up the Twin Towers, remember that day? They hijacked 4 planes, and the Air Defense Command didn't have any fighters in the air. No one's ever asked Dick Cheney about that. Dick Cheney, you recall, worked for Bush. Remember that? I know there's no applause for any of these people of recognition. So you're in very strict denial, obviously. But some of you must have voted for him, unless they seized power. Cheney, you remember him? Bush hired him to help him find a vice president. Remember that? Then he found himself. He came in, he said to Bush, I've looked it all over and I seem to be the most qualified. And he went to University of Wyoming, married to one woman, Lynn Cheney, and they had their honeymoon at an undisclosed underground location. Thank you. It was getting hard here to keep breathing and talking without any reaction. So George Bush, you know this guy Comey who cleared Hillary? I knew the other head of the FBI. You know, J. Edgar Hoover was the only head they had. 13 presidents kept reappointing him, even though the Democrats had said he's a cross-dresser. Very bad guy. Yeah, well, I know that's a plus now. Anchorman at CNN. So, when Bobby was Attorney General, when Jack Kennedy named his brother as Attorney General, Hoover would not recognize him. He kept calling him, but Hoover would not take the call, the Attorney General. So Bobby walked into his office, I'm a witness, with a red phone. He said, when that rings, that's me. I'm your boss. Answer it. He never answered it for 3 years. And then when Kennedy was murdered in Dallas, Hoover called Bobby and said, your brother's dead. How do you like them apples? And during that time, I was in and out of there. And at one point, they didn't want to admit a black guy to the University of Alabama. So Bobby sent his assistant, Nicholas Katzenbach, down, the deputy attorney general, to see if the guy got in. And the governor down there called out the National Guard to keep the black guy out of class. So Jack Kennedy kept pacing up and down. And he said, the Democratic Party is going to lose the black people. It hasn't yet, you know, but anyway, so Jack finally got this idea. He said, federalize the National Guard. They'd never be following my orders, saying how to go to school. So Bobby took the phone, he said to Katzenbach, tell them they're federalized. So Katzenbach said, you're federalized. So they all dropped their rifles, you know. And they said, does this mean we can never have children? So I'm glad you enjoyed that. That one guy in the back. Must feel terrible to be outnumbered. I know that feeling. So these were part of my adventures along the way, you know. But I'm going to sit down in a minute. I'm going to take your questions later. And I have several questions. How can we find justice for Bill Cosby? Let me ask you something. Do you know any entertainer that had trouble getting a date after he performed? And he would have to get a prescription of Quaaludes from a Jewish doctor in Beverly Hills. I know that's a redundancy. There's several redundancies. Jewish doctor, German scientist, devious woman. Anyway, speaking of devious woman, the Democratic nominee, this is really hard to believe, watching the death of the party. You know? And of course, around here, in Marin, everybody is only afraid of Donald Trump because of the tremendous power he had on his television show, being able to fire people like Joan Rivers, Gary Busey. People would say, should one man have that much power? So it looks like he has. And his vice president is going to be the governor of Indiana, known and loved by all of you, I'm sure. Dan Quayle came from Indiana. And he was with George Bush. Remember George Bush? The elder George Bush, who was approaching 92. There's a movie about George Bush at the Rafale, about his life when he was a Navy pilot, you know, shot down at 18, floating in the Pacific. His entire life flashes before him, but he isn't in it. So his denial will have veracity. I tell you, it's going to be hard to get a fix on this audience, don't it? I think you've all been disillusioned. But you won't leave the Democratic Party, will you? Even though it keeps leaving you. It's like that old guy who's in love with a young girl. He just can't believe that she's getting older too. The Democrats were, you had a good one up here, Mike Gravel, who lived in Burlingame. Thanks, Chris. And Mike Gravel and Eugene McCarthy probably saved the soul of the party. And McCarthy was a very good friend of mine. And, you know, when he was head of the Government Operations Committee, people would come in there for loans. You know, you have a business, you want to get it started, you know. I mean, I know this is hard for you to imagine. You think of Google, you say, what help do they need? Why do they need North Korea and all that? But Lee Iacocca, who invented the Mustang, went to Chrysler. And he built the Reliant K. He went to McCarthy in the Senate and he said, I need to fund this car. So McCarthy said, well, what does the car do that the government should help you? And Iacocca said, it's seat 6, and it should appeal to the American family. So McCarthy said, hasn't Toyota pretty much anticipated that already? And Iacocca said, no, his car has a large trunk. And every American wants a large trunk. And McCarthy said, only if they live in New Jersey. Yeah, well, it went over better with the Senate. They have a vaster sense of experience than you've displayed thus far. So anyway, before we get to the question, I just want to mention that when you look at these candidates, you're not wrong to doubt them. You have to know the party is better than that. I mean, it's better than Bill Clinton flying in to see the Attorney General. And the Attorney General before her, Holder sold Hillary the pardon for Mark Rich, who now lives in Zug, Switzerland, although he was pardoned by Clinton. Not for money. I don't want to suggest that. I want the show to be reliable. Now, this late date, why did he pardon him? It's a quality of mercy on the part of Bill Clinton. You probably thought he had known, but one other thing about Bill Clinton, besides the fact of proving how far you can go when you have a wonderful woman behind you, there were some rumors that he was unfaithful. I'd like to dispel those tonight, since I have this platform. And almost no audience. So, anyway, do you remember Paula Jones?
Yes.
Hillary paid her $863,000 to go away because she sued Clinton. And so Clinton then said, and I thought in a somewhat unchivalrous mode, he said, Paula Jones is what you get when you drag a $20 bill through a trailer park. So I thought, my God, what's happened to men in this country? So then I quickly turned on Anderson Cooper so I wouldn't break out in sweat. And so that night, as luck would have it, I was appearing in Washington at a club called the Cellar Door in Georgetown. And I walk into the lobby, and sitting there is James Carville, who was Clinton's manager. And I said, don't you think that was an imprudent remark for the president to refer to this girl as what you get when you drag a $20 bill through a trailer park? And Carville said, that's how he got me. Which may be one of my memorable moments. And the other guy that worked there, with him was Stephanopoulos, that shrimp in the morning. Well, Martha, are the Syrians going to counterattack? That guy with the brill cream. So we've fallen on hard times. Do you watch any of that news?
Yes.
Roger Ailes has been accused of trying to sleep with an anchor woman, which I personally think will reflect on the veracity of Fox News. Gretchen Carlson, and they gave her notice. When she said no. So you seem to be very wrapped up in this, so I'll do away with the suspense. So the whole idea of men and women getting together goes almost illegal. Women are only supposed to have their own website now. They're not supposed to have a family and share, the internet with you. So anyway, Roger Ailes was my manager once before he went to work for Murdoch. Went for the real money. He's making about $20 million a year running, at least. And who else do they have? Oh, the Scientologist, Greta Van Susteren, the Scientologist. Do you know that?
She's a Scientologist.
Well, I found it to be very helpful. I was very lonely until I joined. And told them all my secrets. Now, of course, I can't leave and they use that against me. You understand? I guess you accept that. Just a transaction. It's like the government knowing everything about you. I don't like anybody to know everything about me. It's very tough. What else? I made a movie here a couple of years ago with Jerry Lewis. Thank you for holding your applause. You would disturb my thinking. Jerry Lewis is called Max Rose. It's about an alleged jazz musician. And Nathan Michel Legrand did the score for the movie. And it's really wonderful. But well, that's not news. And Legrand is great with Phil Woods playing alto. And Jerry Lewis, Jerry Lewis will be appearing here at the Throckmorton soon in the wonderful work Love Letters. Who's in it with him? Nobody? Just Jerry Lewis. So America in many ways is like the Jerry Lewis show that people keep picking it up. I was on his show, you know. When it was on ABC, I was a regular on the show. And he took issue with some of the things I said, and he demonstrated his differences with me in a unique way. He didn't pay me or let me into the theater. I know this comes as bad news for those of you who... Anyway, the picture was made, and they couldn't release it in France. The French didn't forgive Jerry Lewis. Does that tell you anything? I know a lot of comedians, you know, I worked with most of them. Who do I favor? Jonathan Winters, most of them. And he's the first guy I worked with when I left the Hungry Eye, and we worked in New York at a place called the Blue Angel, uptown. You know, everybody dressed in gowns and tuxedos, and the owner was a snob named Herbert Jacoby, and he wouldn't talk to the acts. You know, he thought we were like scum. So what he would do is go into the audience and pretend a spontaneous remark, louder. Then he'd go to the other side of the club and he'd say, I can't hear you. Now, we were supposed to accept that was what people. So one night he said, I can't hear you. And I said to Jonathan, what did he say? And Jonathan said, he said he can't pay you. Which turned out to be the case. But I just did that so you know I'm mortal. I don't want to set too high a moral standard here, because it might hurt the Democratic Party's chances. By the way, the poll tonight on CNN says that Trump is running 40% and she's running 40%. So it depends what happens in Florida, and Pennsylvania and Ohio. And, here's one from the liberals I was here. I don't like people carrying guns. I don't want to sit down at Starbucks and have the guy at the next table packing a gun. Have you ever had a guy at Starbucks carrying a gun next to you? You haven't experienced that? Well, you ought to go there more often. The liberals run into that all the time. They lead a very rarefied life. You see, it's hard being a liberal. First of all, you don't get any credit for the classes you've taken when you're a communist in college. You don't get any credit for betraying what you said you'd die for. But what else? This is before we get to our question period tonight, in which anything goes. You can ask me anything. I'm very forthright. In fact, I'm foolhardy. If you think about it, I want to change the world. Why? Because my grandfather came from Russia. It's different, you know. It's different than people that came from Poland. You know about Poland? The greatest American politician who was of Polish extraction was Edmund Muskie from Maine. And I was in the Senate elevator with McCarthy one day, and McCarthy was telling a Polish joke. And in fact, I'll tell it to you, because it seems like it's been a long time since anybody's laughed, and it's funny.
I know the joke.
You do know the joke?
Well, we won't go into that yet.
The joke is that two Polish families went ice fishing. They caught 40 pounds of ice. They brought it home and their wives fried it. It melted and they all drowned. Yeah, well, I think it's a bad taste. Don't have it racially. Good for you. We'll go on. So, Anyway, McCarthy's on the elevator, and Muskie gets in. It's very crowded, and he says, Gene, before you go ahead with that character assassination, I should let you know I'm on this elevator. And McCarthy said, then I'll tell the joke more slowly. Well, I think that's really good. But I thought McCarthy was pretty good. The guy who stopped the war by running against Johnson in New Hampshire. And anyway, well, this has made you very cautious. Bernie Sanders. How do you get a refund there? How can he endorse her? Knowing what she's done, and what, well, that's really pushing it. But with politicians, I know a lot of them, I came to because I was the only guy who did that kind of humor. And, when Nixon died, I went to the funeral. I was working in Washington. I went to the funeral with Bob Dole. Remember him? He ran for president against Clinton. And, anyway, these people came through for the funeral, and Carter came through the door, and Dole said to me, "See no evil," describing Carter. These various people came to the door. Hear no evil. Johnson came to the door and he said, "Evil." Yeah, well, I didn't laugh either. You're on the right track. You got to show respect to these people. I think you should show them as much respect as they've shown for you along the way. By the way, does anybody know what Nixon did to earn his being discharged? What did he do? He broke into the Watergate, don't you remember? And he broke into the Democratic headquarters to get a speech that McGovern was going to give. So it's not true that nobody wanted to hear McGovern. Nixon did it. You remember McGovern? McGovern was endorsed by Shirley MacLaine, Jane Fonda, all liberals like them. And when Kennedy was killed, and a lot of you know that I was involved in that investigation, on behalf of Jim Garrison, the DA in New Orleans, I went to McGovern. I said, "You have to help us. We know who killed the president." And he said to me, "Mort, Kennedy wasn't that good a president." So I said, "Is that punishable by death?" Yeah, he took it the way you did. What's happened? You won't be scared out of your convictions? And, did you see all the president's men on Comcast this week? This movie was one in which Redford and Dustin Hoffman are investigating Nixon. They're the two newspaper men. And it's all a lie because their informer was the deputy director of the FBI. Oh, the FBI, they're back in the show again. But they can't find anything on Hillary, even though what she did was unwise and imprudent. But generally speaking, she's a great American leader. Not on the level of her husband, of course. And I was at the Gore convention, too. I worked there for NBC. And did anybody think he was going to be the president? Remember he came out and kissed his wife? Really? Excited. Not up here. I mean, here you come out and kiss your partner. Different up here. So, boy, any questions on it?
Yeah, how would you frame the choice between voting for Trump and voting for Hillary?
Well, it's very hard on your Constitution. If I come in and I say, give Trump a chance, you might lose your temper and say, but he's a goy. You don't know that term? Well, if you meet any Jewish people outside of Mill Valley, Maybe they were Jewish before they moved to Mill Valley. You never know. You know. Ask them what a goy is. And if they say, what is an example of a goy? You say Trump. See if it works backwards. I see people shrinking about him when I go into Coyote Coffee. I say, would you consider voting for Trump? They're like that, you know. And I hate to do that to people when they're having an honest latte. Lactose free, of course. Just remember, San Anselmo people count. Remember that as you go through life. You know, did you notice at that black conference that Obama had about the country falling apart, that Al Sharpton was there? Another great idealist. Remember him? You know? He's a reverend. See, with most Jewish people, no matter how far they get in life, they don't get religious credentials. But Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, they're reverends. They're, well, how can I say this to you? Men of the cloth. What kind of cloth? Cashmere, usually. Nothing, huh?
Yeah.
That's why they're getting away with it. Because everybody's like this. In other words, do you really think she should be able to count on your vote automatically, or should she have to discuss some positions? That's the question. Is it still America? If she's a leader, what was Mrs. Roosevelt? Mrs. Roosevelt said, a woman is like a tea bag. You don't know what she's made of till you put her in hot water. I did Mrs. Roosevelt's 75th birthday dinner. I was the MC of it. And I put on a young comedian named Bob Newhart. He was a good guy. And I guess about 90 now. But think about, do you remember when Bill Clinton got mixed up with Monica Lewinsky? And then you remember Hillary went into the office and said, and they heard this all the way through the White House, they said, how could you be so stupid? And she's talking to the president, you know, it really hurt me. So I believed in his program. What is his program? See how much he can get for Haiti, for the Clinton Foundation. So anyway, that was heard throughout the White House. So there was a hearing by a congressional committee. And the defense counsel for the Democrats said, that isn't the first time you've heard a woman yell at her husband, is it? And the witness said, no, but they weren't arguing about the color of the drapes. You don't find that humorous anyway?
Yeah.
Good. Did you notice that Rudolph Giuliani and Michael Hayden, who was head of the NSA and the CIA, and the guy that was head of Homeland Security, all three have formed a consultancy in which they go to cities around the world and tell them how to protect themselves from terrorists? In other words, this madness is good for some people. It's not good for all of us. We get the tab. But the idea, C-SPAN just played the hearings of the church committee from 40 years ago. That's when they started listening to your phone. General Lewis Allen. And he said, Senator Church said, isn't what you're doing unconstitutional? And General Allen said, the Constitution doesn't apply to us. You remember the Constitution. That often gets in the way. And I noticed you drew a blank about Monica Lewinsky. Now see, as a comedian, there's several ways I can approach this, but naturally I wouldn't take the easy way, you know, by example. First of all, Jewish girl, no stain on the dress. The stain was a dress. You don't find that humorous?
Yeah.
How about this? Any guy that could get a Jewish girl to do that for him deserves to be the president. That closer? Wait, you're really tough. You know, I think you're all in denial. If I was seeing you, for an hour, besides prescribing acid for you, as an opener, I would wonder why you're so tender. Are you not proud of this candidate? Do you feel trapped? What about when she had Elizabeth Warren there, and you saw how vicious she was? And then she said, I'm part Cherokee. That changes everything. That's often happened when I've been intimate with women. I've been brutal toward them, because of my upbringing. But once they announce they're part Indian, the shame engulfs me. Yeah, making fun of liberals. I think it's opposed. It's what we used to call social democrats. Now, in Germany, you've heard of Germany, haven't you? Seen it on movies on Netflix, Achimel, and all that. The Germans had a thing called the Reichstag that was like Congress. And Hitler didn't know how to get their attention. So he set the Reichstag on fire. So the left wing said, this may mean war. And the right wing said, how much would a war cost? And the Social Democrats were in a corner crying, singing Deutschland over alles. That's the story of life. What is it? In other words, wait a minute, I'll quote Jack Kennedy for you. Since I'm over so little, I referred to him before. Jack Kennedy, by the way, the only president who won the Purple Heart by rescuing 14 men and his crew alone at night in cold water, and the only president that never drew his salary. He forfeited $400,000 a year because he thought something else was at stake. And if you want a really great speech, go to Google and get the speech he made at American University, in which he winds up by saying, the Russians and we breathe the same air. We both treasure a future for our children, and we are all mortal. He was better than he knew it was at the time. Because when I met him, it was 42. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about? The Germans, does that resonate with you? There's a difference between Russians and Germans. The Russians are very smart. And the dumbest leaders we've ever had never gave the Russians credit for being smart. That's exactly what's wrong with Hillary. That's not all that's wrong with her, but that's one of the errors. She thinks the Russians are dumb. There's no record of their being dumb. I mean, look back and read what Gorbachev said. I met Gorbachev with Reagan, by the way. Pretty smart. And I said to him, what's your favorite city? He said, well, I'm prejudiced. I love Moscow because that's where I met my wife. Isn't that a great answer? He didn't say, yeah, but I really like to go to Tahoe on a holiday. You know, like gamble and snowboard. No, this guy really, a real McCoy. So he was, and he liked Reagan. He liked it. He thought down and dirty. He was like a regular guy. Reagan's charm was hard to resist. I know nobody here voted for him. You're all kind of like Catholic, small c, liberals. And you're finding that they took your platform away. Because they start with Hillary Clinton, what's going to be the end? If Sanders is too far out for them, and Elizabeth Warren is capable of, she's an Indian. Give me a break. If she's really an Indian, why isn't she on CNN with the others discussing politics? Do you watch CNN? I gather from lack of applause, you don't watch any news channels. CNN is really good. They got some great people on there. They all discuss the same subject, but not with each other. They go down this table, and each one gives the same opinion and pretends it's personally considered. And the anchor man there, of all the journalists in America, remember, we had Elmer Davis and Edward P. Morgan and Eric Severine. We had some pretty good people. But we wound up with Anderson Cooper, who, my favorite exchange is when Donald Sterling, who owned the Clippers, you remember he had a girl, a young girl, and God knows in Mill Valley, that alone is almost too much to discuss. The guy would be attracted to a young girl. What kind of a guy can he be? Heterosexual. But anyway, so she recorded him saying, when you come to the game Sunday, don't bring those black guys. And Anderson Cooper, probing in depth on behalf of CNN, said, why did you become involved with this girl? And Sterling unwisely said, well, Anderson, haven't you ever felt that way about a woman? So he was out of the game. So it's only women that can make fools of any of us. That's the best part of us. That's the best part of it. The fallible part. The part that makes you laugh, you know? The part of Fred Astaire that responded to Audrey Hepburn. That's why the movies were good, see? Because they said, you may not get it, but dream on, pal. That's what was good about the movie. You know, when Humphrey Bogart met Lauren Bacall, both of whom I know well, he was 44 and she was 19. And Variety called him a pervert in print because he was her senior. One of the better marriages, by the way. And when Bogart was over there, when you saw Casablanca and all that stuff, you know, the partner of Warner Brothers, senior partner, was Joe Kennedy, who, besides having a wonderful family in Hyannisport, had a great scene going with Gloria Swanson. You didn't know that, huh? But I hate to bring it down to the tawdry, but you know, there is the human part of the show, too. And since we've tried everything else, what's our next question?
Yeah, from Periscope, we have a question about what's your favorite Western?
Oh, well, probably Hondo or The Searchers or My Darling Clementine. It's all Ford stuff. You know, that's really good stuff, you know. By the way, one of the pictures, you know, when we had the movie service 2 years ago, I showed a picture here called A Couch in New York with Juliette Binoche and William Hurt. She's a ballerina. She rents his apartment in New York for the summer and takes her place in Paris. So when she goes up there, his patients all come up there as a shrink. And they like her. She's comforting and she's perceptive. So they keep coming back. And he smells a rat in Paris. So he goes up there and says he needs therapy. And he goes in and he finds her comforting. Then she says to her girlfriend, is it wrong to get involved with the patient? He said, yes, she wasn't get personally involved with them. She said, then we were wrong to kiss him. It's a movie about somebody falling in love. It's about a flower opening up. That's what we all should be searching for. That's why we went to the movies. They don't know how to make them anymore. That one I made with Jerry Lewis, they're releasing it again, but it doesn't matter. Everybody hates Jerry Lewis. You know what the picture's about? It's about a musician who's dying. His wife dies first, and he goes through her personal effects, and he finds out she was having a scene with some guy. You don't mind if I talk? Bebop talk to you. She was having an affair with a guy, and he's crushed by that, the fact that she would love anybody else. So if you're interested in that, after the show, Chris will distribute a list of theaters where you can see this film. with Jerry Lewis. No laughter, huh? Almost the same as when you see him.
Yeah.
You know, I don't believe anything I've said here is profound. It's just close to the bone. You gotta stop them before they steal your country. They're not worthy people. What are their values? Clinton and his wife only show up with his money. Davos, the Bilderbergers in Dresden, money. They've earned in speaking fees $155 million since he left the White House. That's not what you want. You don't want that. I know you. What do you want? You want love. What else would you want? No, I don't want any love. I'm married. Oh, okay. Boy.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh, hold on one second. Can we take a question from the audience? I may have to repeat it.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
No, I go back to that Hungry Eye. Tell me more about that. The guy that owned it, I remember, did he have a rule there? He would take you, you're a novice, you come in there and you make it big. When you made this verbal, hey, you got to come back again, you know, when I gave you a break. I know it didn't work out with one of the big singers, but...
This is a five-part question.
Yeah, let me repeat it. So the question is about the Hungry Eye and Enrico Benducci, the owner. The question was about how did he hire new guys coming in, and could you talk a little bit about that?
He's a funny guy. You know, when he opened up, he said, anybody can come in here, even if they're penniless students. So when New Year's Eve came, a kid came in and he said, can I sit here with my girl? He said, you bet you can. Can I sit here all evening? He said, you bet you can. And then he took out a bottle of champagne. He said to Enrico, could you put that on ice? And Enrico said, get out! So, that's a true story. But what he did was he had a bond with people. You know, I did very badly there when I started. But I was thin and hungry like I am now. And he nurtured it. He liked Jonathan Winters because he was crazy too. You know, Jonathan ran out of the club one night and went down to the wharf and went up on the mast for the Valclufa. And Enrico talked him down. And Jonathan was really nuts, you know, went inside several times. But can you name anybody talented? I mean, it's like Van Gogh. Remember Van Gogh? Van Gogh's agent was his brother. Not a very good agent. He never sold him. But anyway, the club was great because it gave you a place to find out what you wanted to say. It took me a while. You know, everybody was stung, not like here, where everybody grasps all the innuendo. But you can't face what you become. That woman would arrive and decide that the presidency is owed her without an agenda in a country where nobody's working. That's really what's wrong. A lot of people are employed, but nobody's working. Think of any doctor you go to. Are they interested? I don't find them interested. I remember when Jewish kids were really interested in becoming a doctor. What happened to those Jewish kids? I don't know. They're probably wandering the streets, cold-eyed, you know, because they didn't get to medical school. But anyway.
We have a question about your grandfather from Russia.
Yeah.
Do you have any? Do you remember him at all? And did he? How long did it take for him to become a citizen?
No, there were 9 boys. Yeah, I remember my mother's father in Montreal. He owned the town. Very aggressive, perceptive. My dad's father came from Lithuania, a NATO country, by the way, if anybody would like to applaud. And nothing would surprise me. And there were 9 boys. And they were all open stores, except my father, who wrote poetry. And my father went to Poetry Magazine, and he put an ad in 1925. He said, is there a woman out there who would still like to meet a dreamer? And my mother answered that ad and took the train to Los Angeles, and they got married in 3 days. Did it stay together? No. She went on into film. And he's trying to direct. You're so serious about all this. I thought I was suffering, and I made it easy for you. I'll mash it up, so that you won't know you're getting yesterday's food. Yes, what's on your mind?
Yeah, we have a question about. We're going to take a question in the room in a moment, but the first question online is about Roger Ailes. You mentioned Roger Ailes, your manager.
Yeah.
How long was he your manager, and how would you rate him as a manager?
He was terrific. He was very attentive. He had me and a girl named Kelly Garrett who used to sing in the Carson show. And at some point, he decided that it was a losing battle, but he really liked me. In his first book, which you can get on Amazon, he says there, Mort is the cheapest maintenance guy in the world. He can read a paper and give you an act. Oh, he really liked me. Although, and by the way, if you go to Google, you'll see me interview him on my show for the Christian Science Monitor. And then he came up with this thing, and then, then he fired Gretchen Carlson. I certainly don't approve of that. And she's going to be missed as a person who finds stories. He said, return her red dress, she's no longer an anchor woman. You never seen Fox? They have this one dress they give to women. And they never move from the couch.
So we have a question from the room.
Yeah.
The question is, why, as a comedian, have you spent 55 minutes talking about Hillary but not about Trump? That was the question.
But it's very open to question whether he'll succeed. If everybody is as enthusiastic about him as you have been tonight, I think you're only suspicious of him because he's unknown. And then there's Hillary, whom you know all too well. And the idea that they would trap the American people like that, who's trapped them? The intelligence agency. This is being run by the Pentagon, the NSA, and the CIA. So it doesn't matter who the president is. Do you think that Hillary hasn't met with them before? How did she impanel a jury against Assange? But first of all, in Mill Valley, nobody thinks he can be elected. I like the fact that he's modest, when he says, I have a great education, I'm really smart. Well, most of you are not convinced yet. I guess we'll have to wait till the first bombs drop on North Korea. I'm not pro-Trump. I don't even know. You know who's getting the show, by the way, The Apprentice? Schwarzenegger has the show on NBC in the fall. Remember Schwarzenegger? I knew his wife and her mother, Eunice Kennedy. No prisoners. But you're getting away with disliking him, but you haven't earned it. When I take a guy on, I've already done the research. Pence of Indiana, Chris Christie. You got to get these people. You got a lot to do to get America back. You got to have war crimes trials. You got to find out, when Hillary says, we went after Osama bin Laden and we got him. I like that, the emphasis. Great stagecraft. First of all, how do they know they got him? If they got him, why didn't they give him a trial? Why did they take his body and throw it into the Indian Ocean? And then 6 days later, the SEALs that killed him in front of his family, one of our prouder moments, they then were blown up in a mysterious accident in a helicopter. Shouldn't Obama have to answer to that? Why did he appoint her? I remember when he was campaigning, he hated her. The best guy running at that time was John Edwards. What happened to him? He chased the girl. Oh my God. Not really. What did he chase? A girl. In a horror. I think that was a setup. And I think Gary Hart with Donna Rice was a setup to get rid of a guy that wouldn't take orders from the intelligence people. John Edwards asked for a recount in Ohio, and Kerry vetoed it, even though it would have made him president. Any questions, boys and girls? No. Yeah, you're kind of curious, but I'm not that curious.
We have a question online from Facebook. Somebody said, would you ever cooperate with an author for your biography?
I did. My first book, I'm glad you brought that up. My first biography was written in 1974. It's called Heartland. It's available on Amazon. And at that time, I thought I knew everything. But nature double-crossed me and I lived. So now, everything since then is in a book called The Last Man Standing. By finally a laugh. By Jim Curtis. And that's going to be published in April by the University of Mississippi, where Faulkner went to school, William Faulkner. And so anyway, I tell everything there, everything, straight out, you know. How I had this great opportunity to be a comedian, I squandered it chasing women, not realizing that the Clinton administration would come along and put me to shame.
We have another question about how have audiences changed throughout your career?
Well, the old San Francisco audiences were pretty loose. And once I hit the cover of Time and everything, they were great in Chicago and great in New York and Washington, Boston. But now they're all tensed up again because it's a belief state. And through the good offices of Lucy, I've continued on. I think we're right. I think we're onto something. But somebody needs to comfort you and get you through the crosswalk. What we're discussing here is not that far out. We're talking about corruption. And even though it wears a t-shirt that says Democratic Party, it's still corruption. I mean, if Dianne Feinstein ever gotten into a fight with Brennan at the CIA? And of course, I can't take the emotionalism of Jerry Brown. Dramatics. Camilla Harris is going to take Barbara Boxer's place. Got a DA that's lost 80% of the cases. Got to remember, I was an investigator for a DA that won 100% of the cases. I've had a varied life, good, you know. The influence of some pretty good women, actually. And the scorn of some pretty good women. One thing I like about this audience is the strict attention it pays to everything I volunteer. See, I believe if people tell you the truth, eventually you will become porous. It will sink in that this can't be the world. What is this, after all? Black Lives Matter? You mean you raise the rent so they can't move here? Isn't that really what it is? And that's a kind of blackmail, too. The shucking and the jiving and the yelling and the danger and walking and strutting and crosswalks. That's all hokum. When I grew up, it was all about talent. Nobody had to make you listen to Thelonious Monk. He was the best piano player you ever heard, period. You know, I worked at the Modern Jazz Quartet, they were the best. Nobody had to tolerate them. This other stuff, you know, were gifts dribbled out from well-meaning liberals, no good. It'll all be cut off when they're not well-meaning, when they don't feel good in the morning. It's like saying to women, you got a lousy deal, can we arm you? The whole gun thing, the Second Amendment should be, Do you really think Trump cares about the Second Amendment? Come on. Be straight, folks. It's me. I mean, are you sure you don't dislike him because he's a Gentile from Pennsylvania? Because you can't dislike him for his principles because he hasn't revealed any. So, I mean, but once Pence gets in there, how about Biden? If Biden's son is the vice president of a Ukrainian oil company, he's corrupt. But why isn't he running? He's been in that racket all his life. When the Secret Service killed a man a block from the White House, why wasn't it ever reported? There have been gunshots near the White House. The story went dead because the press is bought. But I can remember when it wasn't. You know? But people lost their sense of humor. They've lost a lot of their Jewishness too. You need to get a little bit skeptical about all this. I mean, the only Jewish person I know is skeptical of Trump is Justice Ginsburg. By the way, her husband is Ross Perot's tax attorney. Remember Perot?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Remember on the debates when Clinton said, I have a way to get people jobs, and Perot said, I'm all ears. And he was. Do you remember that? Boy, are you in denial. If this were an hour with a doctor, I'd give us a 0. You're not admitting anything's wrong. You're suppressing an admission, you know. I know about shrinks. I think they're a good idea sometimes. I'm not sure medication is. You probably think medication is a good idea by now, right? You know what Freud said? A patient came into him and he said, I'm going to get married. Freud said, okay. And the guy said, I love this girl. And Freud said, what are your plans after you've been alone? You don't find that amusing? You remember Freud?
Yes.
During Kristallnacht, specializing in foreign languages in this show, during Kristallnacht, the Nazis came into Freud's house. That's where he analyzed people. In his house. And he had a little petty cash box. He said, you pay $20 for the hour. If you don't pay, you won't show up. He's right. He's right then, he's right now. So the Nazis came in and they took his money and they said, what do you say now, Herr Doctor? He said, I get more than that for a house call. And well, you would have been a great audience in Vienna too. You're so guarded. Are you afraid I'm right about any of this?
Yes.
Bernie Sanders threw you a curve. What does that mean? I'll never love again. No. Be careful who you trust. Sex is a good idea, just be choosier. You don't think sex is a good idea? That's going to come as a tremendous disappointment to me, if you're right. Yeah, anything else, Chris?
No, that's it.
I can't believe it. That was like taking an exam to become an accountant. Totally unrewarding, you know. I mean, why are you all in denial about all this? It's America. It doesn't mean you have to agree with me, hardly. You can stand up and you can say, you're wrong. Hillary Clinton has accomplished a great deal. She alienated her husband. You know Bob Woodward, you know the one that Dustin plays in All the President's Men?
Yeah.
He wrote a book about Hillary. And he says, and suddenly she moved to Arkansas. I said, why? And he said to me, because she loved the guy. Does it sound like her? She seems to be somewhat more calculating of the mass effect. None of this has anything to do with the facts. Nobody has told you anything. You have to insist that a candidate tells you how. You're going to be rich. Sounds good. Which way do I turn at the end of the hall? That's what you have to say to Trump. and you have to say to her, but she's kind of inaccessible. You notice she knows what you're going to say. Have you noticed that when you talk to Hillary Clinton? Before you ask the question. And if you could suggest she's corrupt, you know, how do you get the financing from Goldman Sachs? She goes, actually, it's not more like the ground. Don't any of you want to know about any of this? What about, how did the Jews get into Wall Street? They weren't there when I was in grammar school. How did they get there? And the governor of Ohio, who's that creep, Kasich, he worked for Lehman Brothers for 9 years. What did he do? Isn't anybody going to ask, why do Lehman Brothers need a guy from Ohio? These are fair questions for him. You know, you're going to need these answers. I'm warning you. You know, you're eventually going to have to leave Mill Valley. And on that day, it'll all come home to roost. Well, the questions were interesting, and I'll give you that. But I get the feeling from the audience that don't ask this because you're afraid you'll get an answer.
Well, we have, excuse me.
Yeah.
We have one question in the back. I'm
Sure.
gonna, please ask it to me so I can repeat it. You won't.
Given full agreement with everything he says, what is his
Okay. The question is, given full agreement with everything you've said,
Yes.
what is it we should do?
What you should do? Don't vote if you don't have any faith in it. Are any of you that radical? What do you think would happen if this country didn't vote? You can't approve people who have displayed no virtue. What are they going to do? You know, if they haven't displayed it yet, what are they going to do? When they put Assange in a slam? Don't you wonder about that? He's got principle enough to live in the Ecuadorian embassy for 5 years in one room on an air mattress with his apple. Because he thinks if you knew the truth, you'd change it. Now, do you want to hurt his feelings? Or do you want to change that? You can change that. I did it. I know you can. Eventually, you can change things. The myth is that you can't. What I usually get from the audience is, what about Lenny Bruce? As if he changed anything. Lenny Bruce, by the way, when he went to court, you know, I was the technical advisor on the Dustin Hoffman movie. When he went to court, the judge said, "What's your name?" He says, "Lenny Bruce." He said, "I don't mean that. I mean your legal name. Leonard Alfred Schneider. Did you change it because you're ashamed of being Jewish?" And Lenny said, "Yes." Like up here laughing at from the judge. But he became a myth, but it's a stolen myth. People made him into Jesus. Jesus is the guy you ought to follow.
Mort, we have one last question from the web.
Yeah.
The question is, were you ever blacklisted? Were you ever blacklisted?
Yes, sure. Not overtly, but it came in a very strange way. It came because I asked how the president died, and they didn't want that said. It also came from the other side because the president's father didn't like me making any jokes about him, and he had a lot of influence. Yeah, I had vast periods of unemployment. Why didn't it discourage me? Because I'm our father's son. How about that for tradition? It's beginning to sound like Fiddler on the Roof. Jewish folklore. But real Jews, not social democrats, real ones. Do you know that every successful aircraft designer in Russia now is Jewish? Didn't know that, did you? I hope this will swell your chest as you leave the theater. Listen, you were great. I know I gave you a bad time.
We have another question.
Yeah, what's the name?
Do you think Trump?
You have to go to the producer.
Do you think Trump might change some of this dynamics?
The question is, do you think Trump might change some of these dynamics? That was just a direct question. Do you think